Patricia pulled her suitcase across the marble floor of the penthouse. She wasn't running. She wasn't crying. She wasn't throwing things or screaming or slamming doors. She was just walking. Calm, steady, done. The wheels of her suitcase made this low rumble that echoed through the entire space. It bounced off the high ceilings and the designer walls and the imported furniture and every single expensive thing that filled this place. That sound was louder than any argument they'd ever had. Behind her, Seo-jun stood in the middle of the living room. He was still wearing his dress shirt from the business meeting he'd just come from. The same meeting that made him 3 hours late to their anniversary dinner. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. His tie was loosened. His jaw was tight, and his fists were clenched at his sides. Every part of him wanted to say something. Every part of him wanted to cross that floor, grab her hand, and tell her to stay. But he didn't move. He didn't call her name. He didn't stop her. Because somewhere deep down in the part of himself he'd been ignoring for months, he knew she was right. Patricia reached the front door. She paused. Her hand rested on the handle, and for a moment, Seo-jun thought she might turn around. He held his breath. But she didn't turn. She just spoke, and her voice was steady, almost gentle, which made it worse. "I can't keep loving someone who's never here, Seo-jun." Then she opened the door and walked out. The door closed behind her, softly, not a slam. That was what made it hit so hard. A slam would have meant anger. A slam would have meant there was still fire, still fight, still something left to burn. But a soft close meant she had already grieved this relationship while she was still in it. She had already mourned him while lying next to him in bed at night. She was already gone long before she packed that suitcase. Seo-jun stood there for a long time. The penthouse was so quiet he could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. His phone buzzed on the kitchen island. Another notification. Another deal. Another thing that needed him. He didn't answer it. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down. He watched Patricia cross the driveway below. She loaded her suitcase into the trunk of her car. She didn't look up. She got in, started the engine, and pulled out. The taillights disappeared around the bend, and then she was gone. Now, to understand why this moment shattered Seo-jun, you need to understand who this man was. Park Seo-jun was the head of one of the most powerful Korean-American business empires in the country. Real estate, luxury hotels, tech ventures, and commercial development. His family's organization operated across some of the wealthiest cities in America, from Beverly Hills to Manhattan to Bellevue, Washington. People in the business world called his network the syndicate because of how tight, how loyal, and how impenetrable his circle was. And because of his Korean heritage and the way he commanded every room he walked into, the streets and the boardrooms alike called him a mafia boss. But Seo-jun didn't deal in violence. He didn't deal in blood. His power came from money, strategy, influence, and the kind of loyalty that made powerful men follow him without question. He was 34 years old, sharp as a blade, disciplined in every area of his life. Except one. He was terrible at showing up for the woman he loved. And Patricia wasn't some woman who needed his money or his name or his penthouse. She was 28, a black woman with fair skin and natural curls she usually pinned up when she was stressed. She worked as an interior architect for high-end residential projects. She had her own career, her own income, her own ambition. She didn't fall for Seo-jun because of what he had. She fell for who he was at the beginning, the version of him who was present, who was attentive, who once drove 40 minutes just to bring her soup when she had a cold. But that version of Seo-jun had slowly disappeared behind conference calls, overseas trips, emergency board meetings, and a phone that never, ever stopped ringing. The anniversary dinner was just the final drop in a glass that had been overflowing for months. Patricia had made a reservation at a restaurant in Old Town Scottsdale. She'd gotten there early, lit candles on the table, ordered water and waited. 20 minutes passed, then 40, then an hour. The waiter came by for the third time, gently asking if she was ready to order. She smiled politely and said she was still waiting. She texted Seo-jun. He replied, 20 more minutes. 20 more minutes came and went, then 30 more, then nothing, no call, no update, just silence. After 2 hours, Patricia paid for her glass of water, left the restaurant, drove home, and started packing. Not out of spite, not out of drama, out of pure, bone-deep exhaustion. She was tired of being the only person who showed up for their relationship. Back in the empty penthouse, Seo Jun's phone buzzed again. This time it was Dowan, his right-hand man and most trusted advisor. He picked up. "Cancel everything tomorrow," Seo Jun said. Dowan was silent for a beat. "All of it." Seo Jun hung up without answering. He sat down on the couch where Patricia used to fall asleep waiting for him to come home. Her perfume was still on the cushion. He pressed his palm against the fabric and closed his eyes. "Now let me ask you something real. Do you think not giving a partner or a spouse good time and attention is enough to end a relationship or marriage? I really want to hear you out on this. Please say your opinion in the comment. I will be waiting in the comment. Also go ahead and like the video. And if you're not subscribed yet, please go ahead and do so that you won't be missing good stories like this." Now let's continue. To understand the weight of what Patricia left behind, you need to see what they had before it all went wrong. 6 months before that night in Scottsdale, Seo Jun and Patricia met in the most unlikely place. Not at a gala, not at a rooftop party, not at any of the exclusive events his world was known for. They met at a hardware store in Beverly Hills. Patricia was there buying materials for a client project. She was sourcing a specific cut of high-grade walnut for custom shelving in a penthouse remodel. Seo Jun was there because he personally inspected materials for his hotel renovations. He never trusted anyone else's eye for quality. It was one of the things that made him obsessive, one of the things that made him successful, and one of the things that eventually made him impossible to live with. They both reached for the last walnut slab at the same time. Patricia looked at him, he looked at her, and she said without flinching, "You can have the next shipment. I was here first." Nobody talked to Seo Jun like that. Not his business partners, not his competitors, definitely not strangers in hardware stores. Dowan, standing behind him, looked like he'd swallowed a nail, but Seo Jun didn't get angry. He laughed. A real, genuine laugh, the kind that came from somewhere he didn't access very often. He let her have the slab, then he asked her to coffee to, as he put it, negotiate future lumber disputes. She said no. He came back the next day. She said no again. The third day, she finally said yes just to stop him from showing up. That coffee lasted 4 hours. What followed were the best 3 months of both their lives. Seo Jun showing up at her project sites with lunch, not fancy catered meals, just sandwiches from whatever spot was nearby. Patricia teaching him about architectural flow, about how the angle of a doorway could change the way a person felt when they entered a room, about how design was really about making people feel safe. He listened to her like every word was the most important thing he'd ever heard. And for a man who spent his days hearing billion-dollar proposals, that was saying something. There were late-night drives through the hills. A weekend trip to Napa Valley where Seo Jun turned off his phone for 48 straight hours, the only time he'd ever done that. Patricia cooking dinner in his kitchen while he sat at the counter and just watched her, not checking emails, not taking calls, just watching her move through his space like she belonged there. Patricia told her best friend Naomi on a phone call one night, "I think this one's different." Naomi, who lived in Austin and had watched Patricia go through her share of disappointing relationships, said, "A man that busy will always choose work, Patty. Just watch." Patricia didn't want to believe her, and for a while she didn't have to. But then the shift happened. Slowly, like a tide pulling out so gradually you don't notice your feet are dry until the water's gone. 3 months in. The cancellations started. First it was small, 30 minutes late to dinner, then an hour. Then he missed her gallery opening entirely, the one where her design work was being featured for the first time, the one she'd talked about for weeks. He called afterward and said, "Something came up, I'm so sorry." Something always came up. Entire weekends vanished. Business trips to Manhattan, meetings in San Francisco, calls with investors in Palo Alto that couldn't wait. He always apologized. He always sent flowers. He once sent a $12,000 bracelet with a handwritten note that said, "I'm sorry. Next weekend is ours." But when next weekend came, he was in a meeting that ran long, and next weekend became the weekend after that, and then the one after that, until the promise became meaningless. Patricia never asked for the gifts. She stopped opening the boxes. They stacked up on the dresser like little monuments to his absence. What she wanted was him on the couch on a Tuesday night, watching bad reality TV, eating takeout, asking about her day. She wanted ordinary, but he kept offering her extraordinary things as substitutes for the only thing that mattered, his presence. One night, about a month before she left, Patricia sat alone in the Scottsdale penthouse. It was almost midnight. Seo Jun was on a call in his home office. She could hear his muffled voice through the wall, sharp and commanding. She sat on the couch scrolling through her camera roll. Every picture of them together was from the first 2 months. After that, it was just photos of rooms she'd designed. Beautiful, empty rooms. The pattern hit her hard. She started crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears rolling down her face, the kind that come when you're not sad anymore, when you're just tired. She wiped her face, put down her phone, and whispered to no one, "I can't do this anymore." 3 days after Patricia left, Seo Jun looked like a man coming apart at the seams. He hadn't slept properly. He was showing up to work but not really present. Dowan noticed. The staff noticed. Everyone noticed, but nobody said a word because you didn't question Seo Jun when his jaw was set like that. The person who finally did was his younger sister, Minji. She flew in from the family home in Bellevue, Washington, took one look at him sitting behind his desk staring at nothing, and said, "You look terrible." He said he was fine. She sat down across from him and folded her arms. "You lost her, didn't you?" He didn't answer, which was the answer. Minji was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that cut deeper than anything Patricia had said on her way out. "Dad did the same thing to Mom, and Mom stayed, but she was never happy, not really. She smiled for us. She kept the house running. She was there at every dinner, but her eyes were somewhere else. Do you want Patricia to stay and be unhappy, or do you want to become someone worth staying for?" Seo Jun told her it wasn't that simple. His empire required him. Thousands of jobs depended on his decisions. Hotels, developments, partnerships, all of it ran through him. If he stepped back, things could fall apart. Minji shook her head. "Then maybe you need to build something that doesn't fall apart the second you take a day off. Because right now, your business is a machine, but you're not, and neither is she." She left his office after that. He sat there for another hour, her words bouncing around his skull like a rock in a tin can. Meanwhile, Patricia was in Austin, Texas. Naomi had picked her up from the airport, taken her suitcase without asking any questions, and put her in the guest room. For the first 3 days, Patricia mostly slept. Not because she was lazy, because grief is exhausting and leaving someone you love takes everything out of you, especially when you know you made the right choice, but the right choice feels like cutting off your own arm. On the 4th day, she got up, showered, put on real clothes, and told Naomi she needed to work. She picked up a few freelance interior architecture projects around Austin. She set up her laptop at a local cafe and started sketching. Halfway through a living room layout, she stopped. She stared at the page. She'd drawn the penthouse in Scottsdale, the exact layout down to the placement of the windows. She tore the page out, crumpled it, and threw it in the trash. On day 5, Seo Jun texted her, "I know I don't deserve a response, but I need you to know that I hear you." Patricia read it. She didn't reply. The next day, another text. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking you to tell me how to be better." She read that too. She typed a response, stared at it, deleted it, put her phone face down on the table and pressed her palms against her eyes. Naomi sat down next to her and said, "You did the right thing, Patty." Patricia whispered, "Then why does the right thing feel like I'm drowning?" While Seo Jun was fighting a war inside himself, a different kind of war was starting outside. A rival investor named Victor Harlan was making moves against Seo Jun's empire. Victor was old money, East Coast elite, with connections stretching back generations. He'd started quietly acquiring properties and shares adjacent to Seo Jun's holdings, positioning himself for a hostile takeover of Seo Jun's flagship hotel in Manhattan. Dowan flagged it during a briefing, and told Seo Jun the situation was escalating fast. The old Seo Jun would have dropped everything, flown to New York, gone to war, but this time he hesitated. He looked at his phone, still no reply from Patricia. He made a decision that shocked everyone in his circle. "Handle the initial defense," he told Dowan. "Give me a full briefing in 48 hours. I need to fix something first." Dowan stared at him. In 15 years of working together, Seo Jun had never delegated a threat like this. Not once. That night, Seo Jun booked a flight, not to New York, to Austin. Seo Jun landed in Austin and checked into a hotel downtown. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. He'd negotiated deals worth billions. He'd faced down competitors who tried to destroy his family's legacy. He'd commanded rooms full of the most powerful people in the country without breaking a sweat. But right now, he had no idea what to say to the woman he loved, because every script in his head sounded like a negotiation tactic, and Patricia wasn't a deal to be closed. She was a person who'd asked for something simple, and he'd failed to give it. He called Minji. She picked up on the second ring like she'd been waiting. "I'm in Austin," he said. "Good, what's your plan?" "I don't have one." Minji laughed softly. "Perfect, don't show up with a speech. Show up with the truth, even if the truth makes you look weak, especially if it makes you look weak." Seo Jun found out where Patricia was working through a mutual acquaintance, a designer they both knew from the Beverly Hills circuit. He didn't send someone to track her down. He didn't use surveillance or money or power. He asked, and someone told him she'd been working out of a cafe near South Congress. He showed up the next morning. When he walked through the door, Patricia was sitting at a corner table with her laptop and a stack of sketches. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater with her curls pinned up, the way she did when she was deep in work. She looked up when the door chimed, expecting a barista or a stranger. Instead, she saw him. Her face went through 5 emotions in 2 seconds. Shock, pain, longing, anger, and then a careful blankness, a wall going up to protect everything underneath. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Seo Jun stood there, no bodyguard, no Dowan, no armor. Just him in a simple jacket, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "I didn't come to convince you of anything," he said. "I came to listen, because I realized that in 2 years, I did all the talking and none of the hearing." Patricia stared at him for a long moment. Something in his voice was different, not the polished, measured tone he used in boardrooms, something raw, unfinished. "Sit down," she said. He sat, and they talked, really talked. For the first time in months, there was no phone buzzing between them, no assistant calling with emergencies, no deal waiting in the background, just 2 people who loved each other sitting across a table covered in sketches and coffee cups. Patricia told him everything, how she felt invisible in their relationship, how the gifts started to feel like receipts for time he never intended to give, how she began wondering if she was just another acquisition, something he obtained and then stopped maintaining because there was always something newer, bigger, and more urgent. That last part hit Seo Jun like a freight train. His eyes actually watered. And he looked away because he was not a man who showed that kind of vulnerability in public. He swallowed hard and said, "You were never something I acquired. You were the only thing in my life that felt real." Patricia leaned forward. "Then, why did you treat our time together like it was optional?" He opened his mouth and then closed it. He didn't have an excuse. He didn't have a good reason. The honest answer was that he'd spent his entire adult life believing that his value came from what he built, what he controlled, what he managed. And somewhere along the way, he'd started treating his personal life the same way he treated business, something that could be rescheduled. He said that out loud, all of it, no polish, no spin, just the ugly truth. And that honesty, the absence of excuses, was what made Patricia believe him for the first time in months. But she didn't take him back. "I believe you love me," she said quietly. "I've never doubted that, but love without presence is just a nice idea, and I can't live inside a nice idea anymore." She told him she needed to see change, not hear about it, not read about it in a text. She needed real, sustained, uncomfortable change, the kind that costs something, the kind that actually restructures your life and not just your words. Seo Jun nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He accepted her boundary, and that acceptance, that respect for what she needed, was the first real sign of growth he'd shown. He stood up to leave, and as he reached the cafe door, his phone rang. Dowan. He answered, and what he heard made his stomach drop. Victor Harlan hadn't just gone after the Manhattan hotel. He was now targeting property portfolios in Palo Alto and a tech venture in Seattle. This wasn't a business play anymore. Dowan had done some digging. Harlan had connections to old rivals of Seo Jun's father. This vendetta went back 20 years. Seo Jun was now caught between two wars, one for his empire, one for the man he was trying to become, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he could win both. Patricia watched his car drive away through the cafe window. Naomi appeared beside her and sat down. "You okay?" Naomi asked. Patricia shook her head slowly. "No, because I still love him, and that's the problem." Seo Jun flew to New York to deal with the Harlan situation. He set up operations out of his corporate office in Midtown Manhattan, and for the first 72 hours, it felt like the old days. Wall-to-wall meetings, strategy sessions, phone calls at midnight. But on the third night, he stopped. He sat alone in his office looking at the calendar on his desk. It was packed, every single hour filled, and he heard Minji's voice in his head saying, "Maybe you need to build something that doesn't fall apart the second you take a day off." The next morning, Seo Jun did something that shocked his entire organization. He promoted Dowan to Chief Operating Officer with full decision-making authority. Not just the title, real power. He brought in his cousin, Yiwon, a sharp corporate strategist who'd been running operations in Bellevue, to co-manage the Western portfolio. He assembled a senior leadership team and for the first time in his career, gave them room to lead. His longtime advisor, Mr. Kang, a man who'd served Seo Jun's father before him, pulled him aside. "Your father ran everything himself. That's what made him powerful." Seo Jun looked at him and said, "My father died at 58 from a heart attack at his desk with nobody beside him. I'm not doing that." Mr. Kang had nothing to say to that. Meanwhile, Seo Jun studied the Harlan situation with fresh eyes. Victor Harlan was old money, connected, and patient. He'd spent over a decade building toward this moment. His father had been outmaneuvered by Seo Jun's father in a massive real estate deal in San Francisco years ago. The Harlan family lost millions and nearly went bankrupt. Victor had never forgiven. He'd never forgotten. He'd simply waited. Seo Jun met Victor face-to-face at a business forum in Midtown. Victor was polished, dressed perfectly, smiling that kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Your father was brilliant, I'll give him that," Victor said, sipping his drink. "But brilliance without legacy is just a story people forget." Seo Jun looked at him calmly. "And revenge without purpose is just wasted time, something you seem to have too much of." The tension between them could have cut glass. Both men knew what was coming. In Austin, Patricia was facing her own crossroads. A major design firm reached out to her about a lead architect position on a luxury residential project in Greenwich, Connecticut. It was one of the wealthiest enclaves in the country and a dream opportunity for someone at her stage in the career. Naomi was thrilled. But Patricia hesitated. Greenwich felt too close to Seo Jun's world. His network, his circles, his gravitational pull. Naomi shut that down fast. "Girl, you cannot avoid an entire state because your ex does business nearby. This is your career. This has nothing to do with him. Take the job." Patricia took the job. What she didn't know was that her new client for the Greenwich project was an older woman named Catherine Harlan, Victor Harlan's mother. Patricia had absolutely no idea about the connection. Catherine was warm, elegant, recently widowed, and immediately drawn to Patricia's design sensibility. "You design spaces that feel like they have a soul," Catherine told her during their first meeting. "Most architects just give me walls." Patricia smiled, not knowing she'd just walked into the center of a storm. Back in Manhattan, Seo-jun was going through Patricia's social media late one night. She'd posted a photo of a mood board for a new project. The location tag said Greenwich, Connecticut. His hands went still on his phone. Greenwich, that was Victor Harlan's territory, his family's roots. Something about this felt wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it yet. Patricia settled into the Greenwich project and quickly found that Catherine Harlan was one of the best clients she'd ever worked with. The woman had taste, patience, and a genuine interest in the creative process. She invited Patricia for tea after meetings, told stories about her late husband, the family's history in real estate, and her son Victor, whom she described with a complicated sadness. "He's so consumed with the past that he's forgotten how to live in the present," Catherine said one afternoon, staring out the window of her estate. Patricia felt something twist in her chest. Those words could have been about Seo-jun 6 months ago. She almost said something but held back. Victor Harlan showed up at his mother's estate a few weeks into the project. He met Patricia casually, and she found him polished and pleasant, surface-level charming. But during their conversation, he picked up on something she mentioned in passing about having connections to the Korean business world. She didn't specify. She didn't need to. Victor filed it away like a card in a deck. He did his research that night. It took him less than 20 minutes to confirm that Patricia was Park Seo-jun's ex-girlfriend. Victor was smart enough not to go after Patricia romantically. That would have been obvious and clumsy. Instead, he started leveraging their professional proximity as a psychological weapon. At a business event the following week, he casually mentioned to several attendees that he was working closely with a brilliant designer named Patricia on his family estate. He dropped her name in circles where he knew it would travel back to Seo-jun. It did. When the information reached Seo-jun, he called Dowan immediately. "Is Harlan using her?" Dowan investigated and reported back within 24 hours. "She doesn't know about the connection between Harlan and us. She took a legitimate job through a legitimate firm, but Harlan definitely knows who she is now, and he's using the association to get under your skin." Seo-jun was furious, not at Patricia, never at Patricia, but the situation was a trap either way. If he warned her directly, it would look controlling, like he was inserting himself into her professional life after she specifically asked him for space. If he stayed silent, Harlan could manipulate the situation to use her or hurt her as a proxy. He chose a middle path. He called Minji. "I need you to reconnect with Patricia," he said. "Naturally, like you're just catching up." Minji paused. "Is she in trouble?" "She might be, and she doesn't even know it." Minji texted Patricia casually, saying she was in the area and would love to grab dinner. Patricia was surprised, but glad to hear from her. They'd gotten along well when Patricia and Seo-jun were together, and Patricia had always liked Minji's bluntness. They met at a restaurant in Greenwich. Halfway through dinner, Minji carefully asked about the project and the client. When Patricia mentioned the Harlan name, Minji's expression changed just slightly, a flicker, barely visible, but Patricia caught it. "Patty," Minji said slowly, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as a friend, not as Seo-jun's sister." Minji told her the big picture, the rivalry, the vendetta, Victor Harlan's years-long campaign to dismantle Seo-jun's business empire, and the fact that Patricia's proximity to the Harlan family could be used as leverage. Patricia sat back in her chair. She wasn't scared. She was angry, not at Minji, not even at Harlan yet. She was angry at the universe for constantly pulling her back into Seo-jun's orbit when she was trying to build something entirely her own. The next day, Patricia went back to the Harlan estate for a scheduled meeting about the design plans. Victor was there. He greeted her with his usual polish, made small talk about the project, and then, once Catherine left the room, he changed. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Patricia, I have a proposition for you, one that could change your entire career." He paused. "But I need to know, how much do you still care about Park Seo-jun?" Patricia's blood went cold. Patricia looked Victor Harlan dead in the eye. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. "My relationship with Seo-jun is none of your business," she said. And whatever game you're playing, leave me out of it." Victor leaned forward. The charm was gone now, replaced by something colder. "I'm not playing a game, I'm offering you a choice. I can give you a platform, projects across the entire East Coast, introductions to every major developer in the country. I can make your career untouchable. All I need is some insight into how Seo Jun operates, his patterns, his pressure points, what makes him fold." Patricia stood up slowly. She gathered her portfolio from the table and looked at him with the kind of quiet fury that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. "You want me to spy on a man I loved for a promotion. Do I look that small to you?" She walked out. No dramatic exit. No door slam. Just a woman leaving a room because she refused to become a weapon in someone else's war. She got to her car, sat inside, and her hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned pale. Then she pulled out her phone and did something she hadn't done since the cafe in Austin. She called Seo Jun. He picked up on the first ring, like he'd been carrying the phone in his hand every day, waiting. "Patricia," his voice was careful. She told him everything, Victor's offer, the questions, the setup, all of it. Her voice was steady and sharp, the way it got when she was done being polite. Seo Jun was quiet for a long time after she finished. Then he said, "I'm sorry you got pulled into this." Patricia fired back. "I'm not calling for an apology. I'm calling because I don't let people use me, and I need you to know that whatever Harlan is planning, he's not getting to you through me. Not now, not ever." There was a pause on the line. Then Seo Jun said very quietly, "I never doubted that, not for 1 second." Something shifted between them in that silence. Not a reconciliation, but a remembering. They remembered why they fell for each other in the first place, because they were both people who didn't bend. Seo Jun launched his counter-strategy. But instead of going head-to-head with Harlan in a public corporate war, he did something unexpected. He reached out to every investor, partner, and firm that Victor Harlan had burned over the past decade. And there were many. Former partners who'd been pushed out of deals, investors who'd been fed false projections, companies that had been squeezed and discarded. Seo Jun didn't build an army. He built a coalition. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply created a space where people who'd been hurt by Harlan could finally act on it. Within 2 weeks, Harlan's financial allies started pulling back, not because of pressure, but because they looked at Victor's play and realized it was personal revenge dressed up as business strategy. And in the world of serious money, personal vendettas were bad investments. Catherine Harlan called Patricia a few days later. Her voice was heavy with shame. "I had no idea my son was involving you in his vendetta," she said. "That is not what I raised him to be." Patricia was gracious. "You're not your son, Catherine, and I'll finish your project because I committed to it and because you deserve a beautiful home." Catherine cried on the phone. Through her tears, she said, "You remind me of someone I used to be. Don't let bitterness win, dear, not in them and not in you." That night, Seo Jun sat alone in his Manhattan office. Dowen came in with good news. Harlan's position was crumbling. His investors were retreating. The hostile takeover was falling apart. But Seo Jun wasn't celebrating. He was staring at his calendar. For the first time in years, there were open blocks, empty hours that Yiwon and Dowen were covering. And he realized something that scared him more than any business rival ever had. He had free time, and he had no idea what to do with it. He'd spent so long being busy that stillness felt like drowning. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Patricia. "You once told me you wanted ordinary. I'm trying to learn what that looks like. It's harder than anything I've ever done." Patricia read it in her Greenwich apartment, sitting cross-legged on her bed. She smiled for the first time in weeks. She didn't respond, but she didn't delete it either. 3 months passed. In those 3 months, Seo Jun rebuilt his life the way Patricia rebuilt rooms, with intention, with care, with attention to the things most people overlooked. He let Yiwon and Dowen run the day-to-day operations. The Harlan threat had collapsed entirely. Victor's investors pulled out, his hostile takeover attempt crumbled, and he was now dealing with his own internal board revolt. He wasn't destroyed, but he was neutralized. Catherine Harlan actually sent Seo-jun a personal, handwritten letter thanking him for not trying to ruin her son completely. She wrote, "Mercy is the rarest form of power." Seo-jun visited his mother, Yuna, in Bellevue. Yuna was a quiet, elegant woman who rarely inserted herself into her son's business life. She believed children had to make their own mistakes and find their own way back. But when Seo-jun sat at her kitchen table and told her everything about Patricia, the meeting, the love, the failure, the loss, she listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Your father loved me, I never questioned that, but he loved his work more. And I accepted it because that was what women in my generation did. We stayed. We endured. We called it strength." She paused. "But I see you choosing differently. Don't stop choosing differently, Seo-jun." He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. In Greenwich, Patricia finished Catherine's project. The estate was stunning, warm, inviting, full of light and texture and soul. Catherine hosted a small gathering to reveal the finished design, and Patricia's work caught the attention of several other high-end clients in the area. Her career was growing on her own merit, through her own talent, on her own terms. Naomi flew in from Austin for the event. That night, over wine at Patricia's apartment, Naomi asked the question she'd been holding back for months. "Have you talked to him?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she admitted she'd been reading Seo-jun's texts. He sent one every few days, never pressuring, never asking to meet, never begging, just small updates on his life. "Went to a farmer's market today. Didn't know peaches had varieties. Cooked dinner for Minji. Burned the rice, but the bulgogi was okay. Read a book for the first time in 3 years. It was about architecture." Naomi's eyebrows shot up. "He's reading about architecture." Patricia nodded, trying not to smile and failing. Naomi leaned back and said, "Girl, that man is learning your language." A week later, Minji called Patricia. "My mom wants to meet you," she said. "Not in a business way. She wants you to come to a family dinner at her house in Bellevue." Patricia's heart started pounding. A family dinner. "Yeah, just us. Mom, me, Yiwon, Dowan, and Seo-jun." Patricia was quiet. Minji added, "My mom said, and I'm quoting here, 'I want to meet the woman who made my son become a human being.'" Patricia laughed, but her hand was shaking when she hung up. She called Naomi immediately. "Should I go?" Naomi didn't hesitate. "You should have gone yesterday." Patricia flew to Bellevue. Yuna's home wasn't what she expected. It wasn't a mansion. It was a beautiful house, well-kept and warm, filled with family photos and the smell of Korean food. Yuna greeted Patricia at the front door, took both of her hands, held them, and said in accented English, "My son has good taste in one thing, at least." Patricia laughed, and just like that, the tension in her chest loosened. Seo-jun was in the kitchen, helping cook, sleeves rolled up, no suit, no tie, no watch, no armor. When he heard Patricia's voice in the hallway, he turned around. When he saw her standing there in the doorway, he froze. She froze too. The entire room held its breath. He said, "You came." She said, "Minji's very persuasive." He laughed, that same real laugh from the hardware store, the one that had made Dowan look like he'd seen a ghost. They didn't rush anything. They sat at the dinner table with Minji, Yuna, Yiwon, and Dowan. They ate together. Seo-jun served his mother first, then Patricia, then everyone else. His phone was not on the table. It was not in his pocket. It was in another room. Patricia noticed. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. After dinner, they stepped out onto the back patio. The Bellevue skyline was soft and glowing in the distance. Patricia said, "You're different." He said, "I'm trying to be." She shook her head. "No, you are different. I can feel it." Seo-jun turned to face her fully. "I'm not going to promise you I'll be perfect. I'll still mess up. I'll still work too much sometimes. I'll still forget things. But I can promise you this. When you're talking to me, I will be there. Not just standing in front of you, all the way there. Because I spent the last 3 months learning how to sit still, and the only person I want to sit still with is you." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back, but one escaped down her cheek. She whispered, That's all I ever wanted. They didn't kiss, not yet. Patricia reached out and took his hand. He wrapped his fingers around hers and held on like it was the most important thing he'd ever touched. She said, "We start over, completely. No penthouse, no empire talk, you take me on a real date. Tuesday night, somewhere regular." He nodded, "Tuesday." Then she looked him in the eye and said, "And June, if your phone rings during that date, I'm walking out again. And next time I won't come back." He met her gaze and said, "Next time there won't be a phone to ring." Tuesday night, downtown Bellevue. A small Korean-owned restaurant with wood tables and warm lighting and a handwritten specials board near the register. No VIP reservation, no private room, no security detail waiting outside, just a regular booth near the window. June was wearing jeans and a simple button-down. Patricia was in a sundress with her curls down, falling around her shoulders the way they did when she wasn't stressed, when she wasn't bracing herself against the world. They looked like any other couple. He asked about her projects. She told him about a new residential commission in Aspen, Colorado, her biggest solo project yet. A private home for a tech executive who wanted something that felt like a retreat, not a showcase. Her eyes lit up when she described the mountain views she was designing around, the way she wanted the house to feel like it was part of the landscape rather than sitting on top of it. June listened. Not the polite listening he used in meetings, the kind where he was already 3 steps ahead. Real listening. He asked questions, specific questions. He remembered details she'd mentioned months ago about material preferences and design philosophies. She noticed, and it made her chest ache in a good way. She asked about his work. He told her about Dowan and Yiwon running the operation, how hard it had been to let go, how he still woke up at 4 a.m. with the reflex to check emails, but forced himself to wait until 7. He talked about it honestly, not like a man who'd conquered the habit, but like a man who was fighting it every day. She laughed, he laughed, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was comfortable, like slipping into water that was exactly the right temperature. His phone did not ring, because it was in the glove compartment of his car, turned off. Over the weeks and months that followed, they rebuilt. Slowly, intentionally. The way you rebuild anything that matters, with patience, with honesty, and with the understanding that what broke wasn't the foundation but the attention they gave it. Weekend trips where June was fully present. Hiking in Sedona, where he complained about the heat and she took pictures of every red rock formation they passed. A food festival in Portland, where they ate too many dumplings and he admitted he couldn't handle the spice level of a chili booth, which she never let him live down. A quiet weekend in Carmel by the Sea, where they walked the beach at sunset and talked about the future. Not a business plan, not a strategy. Just what they wanted their life to look like. He met Naomi officially. Naomi sat him down at a restaurant in Austin and interrogated him for 45 solid minutes. Where was he when Patricia was crying alone in his penthouse? What exactly was he going to do differently? Did he understand that Patricia wasn't a backup plan? June took every question. He didn't get defensive. He didn't charm his way out. He answered honestly, even when the honest answers made him look bad. At the end of the dinner, Naomi leaned over to Patricia and said, "Okay, he's earned a probationary pass, but I'm watching." Patricia burst out laughing. June exhaled like he'd just survived a business acquisition. Patricia visited Yuna again in Bellevue, just the 2 of them this time. Yuna taught her how to make June's favorite dish, kimchi jjigae. The recipe had been in the family for generations. While they stood side by side in the kitchen, Yuna chopping and Patricia stirring, Yuna said quietly, "He calls me every Sunday now. He never used to call." Patricia's hand paused on the ladle. Yuna smiled. "That's because of you." And June's empire. It didn't collapse because he stepped back. It thrived. Dowan brought a level of operational precision that freed up resources. Yiwon brought fresh perspectives on expansion that June had been too buried in details to see. The company moved into sustainable luxury development, partly inspired by Patricia's design philosophy about spaces that work with their environment rather than against it. June was still the leader. Still the name, still the vision. But he was no longer the single thread holding everything together. He'd built something that functioned beyond his constant presence. And that, ironically, made him more powerful than he'd ever been when he was grinding himself to dust. Victor Harlan quietly approached Seo Jun's team 6 months later about a potential joint venture. Not as an enemy, as someone who had run out of fight and run out of allies and needed a bridge back to respectability. Seo Jun agreed to take a meeting, but he sent Dowan instead. Dowan handled it. Seo Jun spent that day at a furniture expo in Chicago, where Patricia's work was being featured. She was presenting her designs to a room full of industry leaders, developers, magazine editors, and architects who had been doing this for twice as long as she had. She spoke with confidence and clarity, walking the audience through her philosophy, her projects, her vision for residential spaces that actually served the people living in them. Seo Jun stood at the back of the room. He didn't draw attention to himself. He just watched her, the way she commanded the space, the way people leaned in when she spoke. The pride in his chest was almost unbearable. She caught his eye from the stage and gave him the smallest smile, barely visible to anyone else. But to him, it meant everything. 1 year after Patricia had walked out of the Scottsdale penthouse, Seo Jun took her back to the hardware store in Beverly Hills. The store had been renovated since then, new shelving, better lighting, expanded inventory. But the lumber section was still there. He walked her to the exact spot where they'd argued over the walnut slab. "You brought me to a hardware store," Patricia said, laughing. "Again." "I brought you to where it started," he said. Then he reached into his jacket, not a ring box, a key, a single key on a simple keychain. Patricia looked at it. "What's this?" "A house," he said. "Not a penthouse, a house in Bellevue, near my mom, with a design studio built into the east wing." He paused. "I had Yiwon find the land, but I want you to design the rest. Our home, together, only if you want to." Patricia took the key. She held it in her palm and stared at it, and her vision blurred because she was crying. And she didn't care, and she didn't wipe her eyes. She just let the tears come. "You built me a studio," she whispered. "I built you a place where your work and our life exist in the same space," he said. "Because I never want you to feel like you have to choose between the things you love. Not ever again." She pulled him in and kissed him. Right there, in the lumber aisle, under fluorescent lights, while a store employee 3 feet away awkwardly tried to restock plywood and pretended he couldn't see them. 6 months later, the house was finished. Patricia designed every inch. The living room had a wall covered in framed photographs, their trip to Sedona, the food festival in Portland, Yuna's dinner table, Naomi's birthday party, the furniture expo in Chicago. A timeline of their second chance. It was a Tuesday night. Seo Jun was home by 6. He was in the kitchen, cooking, badly. The garlic was burning, and he was frowning at a recipe on the counter like it had personally offended him. Patricia was in her studio, sketching plans for the Aspen project. She heard a small crash, something that sounded like a spatula hitting the floor, followed by a word in Korean she was pretty sure was a curse. She smiled, set down her pencil, and walked into the kitchen. He was standing at the stove with sauce on his shirt, holding a wooden spoon like he wasn't sure what it was for. She leaned against the doorframe and laughed. He looked up at her, and despite the mess, despite the burning garlic, despite the chaos on every counter, he grinned. She said, "You know, I almost didn't come back." He set down the spoon. "I know." "What would you have done?" He walked over to her. He took her face gently in both hands, sauce-stained fingers and all, and looked at her the way he looked at her that first day at the hardware store, like she was the most unexpected and important thing he'd ever found. "I would have kept trying," he said, "every day until you either came back or told me to stop." He paused, "And even then I probably wouldn't have stopped." She leaned into his hands, her eyes closed. She breathed. His phone buzzed on the counter behind them, a single vibration against the marble. They both heard it. Seo Jun glanced at it. Then he looked back at Patricia. Then he looked at the phone one more time. He walked over, picked it up, turned it off, and put it in a drawer. "Dinner first," he said. "Everything else can wait." Patricia once said that love without presence is just a nice idea, and she was right. But what she learned, what they both learned, is that presence isn't something you promise once and then forget about. It's something you practice. Every morning, every evening, every ordinary Tuesday night. Seo-jun didn't save their love with a grand gesture, or a dramatic speech, or some impossible romantic moment pulled from a movie. He saved it by showing up with burned garlic and a turned-off phone. He saved it by learning how to sit still. He saved it by finally understanding that the most powerful thing a man can do is not build an empire. It's to be there. All the way there.